Okay, hi everyone. So hopefully this will be the very last time I have to record the video forever, but it will be the last time. So we're gonna have to sit through one more. I um I won't. I'll try to keep this one a little bit shorter than the first one. Sorry if the first one kind of went for a long time, but I had a lot to say, and the stuff I say in the second half is more important than the stuff I say in the first half. So please watch that. Okay, that's the lecture. That's what you would have heard in the classroom. Okay, had I not had COVID. Today I'm gonna do things a little bit backwards. I'm gonna start with the content and then move into the movie. Okay, that way I can make sure that you guys see the content, like can learn it. And that's important because next week you have your first exam. I know it's crazy that you have an exam already, and some of you have not even met me in person. Don't worry, it'll be easy. And we have a session before that. Okay, so exams on Thursday. We'll see each other on Tuesday and kind of have like a review and talk about the content I taught you through the videos, but then also in person, and you'll be ready for the exam. It'll be in class, okay, and short. Okay, good. So let me just pause this for a second. Okay. So last time I started with the movie and made some kind of remarks about how to read the movie, and it wasn't the only way. And with this week's movie, Under the Skin, there is definitely more than one way to understand the movie. It's very abstract and it's very experimental in a sense, and it leaves a lot open for interpretation, especially the ending. Now there are some basic things that are, that we can say about the movie, and I'll get to that later on in the lecture. But I'm gonna leave that later because I want to have at least one clear interpretation of the movie ready, and that's gonna be mine. And you guys can challenge it or change it or think up your own. But that's why I'm gonna start with the theory first. So I'm gonna start with Hume, explain a little bit about Hume and how Hume differs importantly from Plato and what we saw in of Plato last time with Gyges. So there'll be a bit of review of last time, but please still go listen to that. Okay. Um, good. And then once I've kind of given you a sketch of Hume's philosophy about morals, we'll be able to look at the movie and I think make sense of it, even if it didn't make much sense to you the first, second, or third time you watched it. I don't expect any of you to have watched it more than once yet, but it's the kind of movie that rewards a second viewing. I hope you enjoyed it. I think that once you start to understand the movie, it becomes more interesting. Okay, good. Um, so where do I begin? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I have some slides because I realized I didn't do that last time. Um, and okay, so Hume's moral philosophy, right? And I have as a subtitle or a super title, it's above Sentiment over Reason. The idea here is Hume is not the first, but he's credited as like the forefather of a movement in ethical thought in the 20th century called emotivism, which comes from the word emotion. And it's the idea that morality is not a product of knowledge or of reason or of even argumentation or anything like that. You can have knowledge of morals, you can learn morals, but that's not what's primary. What's primary is the feeling. You need to feel morals. You need to have a desire to do good. You need a desire to hate someone when they do something bad. Otherwise, morality would just be like an abstract set of rules. Okay, uh, there would be rules like the rules of geometry. Right, very few people get very hyped up over breaking the rules of geometry. Right, like if someone breaks the rules of how to construct a triangle or define a triangle, they're not going to get angry and call you like a heathen. Right, they'll just correct you. Um, maybe some mathematicians out there would, but the difference between geometrical rules right, of conduct and moral rules is that, for Hume at least, the moral rules, although we can know them and specify them in language, and so they're kind of like rules in math, they also come with a lot of emotional baggage. And that's why we get offended, or that's why we praise people. That's why we get sad. That's why we feel close, or we trust, or feel betrayed. Okay. Or that's why we want revenge. Okay, these sorts of things. Okay. So Hume is the proto or the early forefather of emotivism. Well, you don't, if you don't like that word, it's a hideous word. Don't use it. But if you are familiar with it, Hume started this, although he didn't use the word. Okay, anyway. Now, while we're looking at Hume, and here we'll just step back to what I said about Plato and Gyges last time. With Plato, he's a rationalist, and in his subtitle would be reason over emotion. And in a sense, the Gyges myth is supposed to show us this, that look, people, if they don't control their desires, right, or if they are able to get away with things, they will become immoral, they'll become bad. And so the problem with Gyges was that when he was invisible, he was no longer afraid of consequences. And so he wasn't able to control himself. His reason uh, was sort of tempted out of sticking to the rules and just doing whatever he wanted because he was invisible. Part of what Plato's view is also is that you need reason not just to avoid temptation, but also to know what the good thing is, what good is. So that's Plato's philosophy. In the movie, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, it was pretty clear that Jekyll, in a sense, was kind of like a Plato. He wanted to divide the mind from the body and make like humans better, right? But he ended up creating a monster. And in that sense, also we see kind of the idea that if you don't govern your desires, control your desires, if you don't police them, they will run amok, right? So whether it's Gyges or Hyde, those desires will take over. So on the surface, coming back to Hume, on the surface, Hume looks like he's saying something completely bizarre. Like, what do you mean emotions are where morality comes from? Like, since Plato, we've seen that it was reason. Now, there have been exceptions, like Aristotle, for example, thought it was a mix of both. And you get a lot of people who talk about emotion, but the vast majority of thinkers were sort of on Plato's side, right? Including Christianity, where like you need the 10 commandments and you need to want them. Yes, of course, there's love in that, but that stuff is almost secondary to some interpretations. Okay, so Hume, how did he arrive at such a radical, crazy uh, point of view? So I just have two slides, and the two slides are based on the reading that that I also posted. Now, the reading comes from a book called Inquiry into the Principles of Morals, or whatever, and it's a short book, but it comes from the very end, from the appendix. Okay, and I haven't given you even the whole appendix. I've given you just the first couple of pages, and I even cut parts out. So it's really condensed, 3 pages, super condensed. And he gives 5 arguments, but I only gave you 2 of them. And I summarized those 2 arguments in these 2 slides, but I think I kind of didn't follow exactly what he said. Now, I say some of the things that he says, but I think you should read the text as well, because there's other ways to interpret what he's saying. I'm bringing in other things that I know about Hume to give you a bigger picture. And so I'm sort of contextualizing his argument, but his specific argument maybe is slightly different to this. So it's rewarding to read the text. Please do that. Okay, and it's very short. Okay, so the 2 arguments are, I titled them, he doesn't title them this way, but one would be kind of from matters of fact, whatever that is, I'll explain all of that in a second, but also from a need to feel. So clearly we're getting this idea that you need to have some kind of feeling, otherwise morality would never get off the ground, would never start. But what's this whole thing about matters of fact? This is kind of a more, argument one is more of a theoretical argument, is more of an abstract argument. Argument two is more of a psychological argument. So you might think the second one is not really philosophy, it's more like psychology, or it's in that gray zone in the middle. So if I have any psych majors in the class, you'll be familiar with this sort of argumentation, okay? But we'll come to that. But together, and remember, he gives 5 in that appendix, but we're only looking at these 2. Together, they're supposed to give a pretty comprehensive picture, okay? Not a full 100% knockdown argument, right? Like you can still argue with him, but he thinks that his picture is better than most people's interpretations of our moral feelings or our moral experience. Okay. So just keeping an eye on time. Okay. So I broke this down into my own interpretation of the argument and bringing things in from outside. The main bullet points are what I would call the argument, right? The 3-step argument and the 4-step argument, 3 premises and a conclusion. What I have with these sub points over here are some important terms from Hume's philosophy and the context that I'm talking about, the background. Okay, so these will kind of be tangential digressions, but they will be very relevant for a fuller understanding of the argument. But the main argument, we'll look at that first. So first premise, we gain knowledge of nature through experience and reason. Now I put nature in quotations here because Hume thinks everything is in nature. Hume is a materialist and he's an atheist. So he denies the existence of God and of a soul and an afterlife and anything actually that's not in the physical universe. So nature is really broad. And it also includes the things that some people would say are extra natural. So like human souls and things like that. So in a sense, he already assumes that like he assumes a lot, okay, because he's an atheist and because he's a materialist. Now, at the time, this would have been a big assumption. This is less controversial today, but that's why I have that in quotations, because it's broader than what we would say is nature. He puts everything here, okay? Almost everything. Okay, so the second, actually, let's look at this. So I have under here this kind of sub-point, the background for this premise is his empiricism. Now, empiricism is just a technical piece of jargon in philosophy. All it means is that well, it means 2 things, but the 2 things sort of go together. One, there is no innate knowledge, as in there is no knowledge that's just in us. We're not born with any knowledge. We don't have any natural knowledge. We aren't born knowing anything. Those are all ways of putting it. Now you might say that seems like it makes total sense, but it didn't used to make total sense. People used to think, well, no, you were born with like knowledge of God, maybe, right? That's why you can suddenly remember God and convert, you know, if you were a heathen. So, but he denies this. He says, look, human beings are just born and they learn things from other human beings. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. But he goes further than most people think that this would go. And he says that that means everything that we know comes through experience and reason when we reflect on the things that we learn. But we learn first and foremost through experience, hence empiricism, like empirical. Okay? And so no innate knowledge, the flip side of that claim is that everything gets learned through experience. And experience for him are your 5 senses. Okay? It's basically your 5 senses. And you know, hearing and seeing are quite complex because that involves listening to other people and reading things and learning through that. So you get a lot of experience, right? Whether it's smelling flowers or listening to a lecture. And reason is something that we use then to reflect logically, right? We associate things together, we divide things. Sometimes we connect things and we say, oh, okay, when the sun rises, the earth gets warm, right? Because the sun makes things hot. And I say, okay, those two experiences, sun rising, hot stone, those must be connected in some way. That's me reasoning based on my experiences. And he thinks that people in the beginning, they just experienced rising sun, hot stone, and then they connected them. Okay. It's not like the first person who saw the sun rising said, oh, okay, maybe we should get in the shade. They didn't know that, apparently, right? They learned that from the first sunburn. Okay. Good. So again, so that's Hume's empiricism. But in this argument, it figures in specifically just as the idea, look, everything we learn comes from nature. Learn about everything is experiential, and then we reflect on it. Okay, good. Premise two, nature only is as it is. It does not tell us how things ought to be. Now, let's go back to the example of the sun and the stone. Hume says when the sun rises and the stone gets hot, I might come and check every single day, right? There's a big stone in my backyard. It's cool at night when I touch it. But when I go to the backyard in midday, sun's been on it for a couple of hours, I feel that it's warm. And I actually feel that it stays warm even after sunset. And then it cools down again after midnight. And like, I have nothing to do with my life. I just keep checking out the stone. And I wonder if the stone minds being touched so frequently. And so I'm checking on this stone and I'm seeing patterns. I'm seeing connections. And I might say, look, you know what? It seems pretty like I can assume when the stone will be hot and when it's going to be cold. I know when it will be. And I can even reason, like if it's cloudy today, it might not be that warm. It might not be warm at all if it's cold today. And if it's an exceptionally hot night, the stone might be hot, or at least not cold. And so I can start to reason about my experiences and organize them. But nothing about nature, Hume says, tells you that it has to be that way, only that it has been that way. Now, think about the way I just used those words. Every single day, I see that the stone behaves the same way. It gets warm, it gets cold, it gets warm again, it gets cold again. And it's correlated with the behavior of the sun. But I can say, look, it's like that. That's how it is. I might even generalize and say the stone in my neighbor's house also does the same. I might get really ambitious and say that is what happens with all stones in such circumstances. Ceteris paribus. Okay? I might generalize to that level. But Hume says that even if you do that, all you know is not that it should be that way, or that it will always be that way, or even that it will be that way this afternoon when you go check. There's just a high likelihood, he says, that it will be that way. There's no reason to think that it won't be. But all you really know is that it has always been that way, according to you, from your experience. And now you start to realize what he's doing. He's saying your experience or the experience of people around you, say everyone in your family has always been interested in the temperature of stones. And it goes back to your great, 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 great grandfather, or you're not grandmother, let her be the scientist of the family. She started this stone temperature testing, right? And you all do it. Well, all you really know as a family is that the stone has behaved that way since the beginning of recorded times, according to your family or according to your community, right? Or you know, the books that you read and things like that. So if everything gets back, if everything comes from experience, then we can only talk about universals or general truths, right? Stones get hot in the sun, with reference to experience. And we can't go beyond that. And so we come back to the idea of, well, will the stone be hot this afternoon? We don't know. No one's experienced it yet. And so I brought up probability. I said, it's very likely that it's going to be. In fact, you probably shouldn't assume that it will be cold. There's no reason to think that. But there's no reason to know that it will be hot yet until you experience it. Okay. So the second premise basically tells you, look, nature just is what it is according to our experience. But nowhere in that experience does it tell you that it will be, sorry, that it has to be that way or that it ought to be that way. Now, the background issue that I raise here is the notion of contingency. So contingency is just a fancy term as well. In philosophy, all it means is it could be otherwise, right? I'm wearing a white t-shirt today. I could have been wearing a black one. There's nothing necessary about me wearing a white t-shirt. It's a contingent truth that I am. That I'm wearing a white t-shirt is contingently true. It's true because it's the case right now. It's not necessarily true, because if it was necessarily true, I could never wear anything but white. And that doesn't make any sense. Now, that seems reasonable about my t-shirt, but Hume generalizes this to everything in nature. He says everything is contingently true. Why? Because it just depends on your experience. Truth is a function of experience, because knowledge comes from experience. So he says, the fact that the stone gets hot in the sun, that's true, and it's always been true. Uh, but you can't say it always will be true, because then you're saying that it's necessarily true. But nothing is necessarily true, only contingently true, right? So this is a difficult thought to get your head around in Hume. I know that it puzzled me a long time, but he's right. If you accept the first premise about experience being the root of all knowledge. Okay, we can talk more about that next week, but let's see where he's going with this, because so far I haven't said anything about ethics, right? So let's just recap real quick. He says all knowledge comes from experience and refers to nature. In other words, we know everything that we know about the world through experience. Okay. The other thing that he says now is that all of that stuff that we know only tells us how things have been or are in the present, not how they ought to be or will be forever. As in, we only have contingent truth. We don't have necessary truth about nature. Okay, and that's because everything refers back to our experience. Okay. Finally, morality. Morality tells us how things ought to be, even if they never are. Okay, so what's he saying here? He's saying that when I say morality, when I say, for example, do not kill, or do not steal, do not lie, I'm not saying here that those things never happened. And I'm also not saying that they didn't happen. That would be absurd. Of course, those things happen. They happen way too often, right? What I'm saying is that they should not happen. They ought not to happen. Or in slightly strained language, it's necessary that they don't happen, but they do happen. And so Hume says, what are we supposed to make of these rules, these truths, right? Morality ought to be the case, but they never are. So they're not natural rules. They're not like the law of gravity that can't ever be refuted, right? Everything falls. Everything obeys gravity. But very few things actually obey morality. And in fact, morality is sadly more the exception than the rule. But it ought to be the case. Okay. So Hume, what he's done here is brought together two very interesting kinds of rule. He's saying that there are natural rules, right? Which, for example, the sun shines on a stone and it always gets hot. Now he's saying that that's not necessary because everything's contingent for him anyway. But then he says, but then we also have a kind of rule that we think about, which is that things you ought to follow, like don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Where do those come from? He says they definitely don't come from experience. And he has several reasons why. They don't come from experience because from experience, all we get are contingent truths. We don't get any necessary truths. So where do we get them from? So part of what he's doing here is that he's reinterpreting the idea of morals. He wants to say that they're not knowledge in the sense that we thought that they were. And then here's another issue. This one's maybe an easier background issue, custom. He basically says, look, we learn morals through human patterns of life and belief, right? We learn them. They're just habit. We pick them up as kids from our parents, and we get socialized. We go to school, we interact with others, and we slowly learn how to think like other people. We learn how to praise and blame like other people, right? We know that some things are good, we know that some things are bad by learning habitually, right? Getting habituated with the customs around us. Now, he says to go from the fact that that's how people do things to that's how they should do things is also unwarranted. It's unwarranted in the way that um, saying that the stone has to be hot this afternoon is unwarranted on his view. It's just how you guys do things. So he's an extreme relativist. He wants to say, look, custom, right? It feels real, but it's just a habit. Okay. Therefore, moral principles are not a kind of knowledge. They're more like a kind of habit. Okay, so you might not be crazy about this argument. And like I said, it's a bit very theoretical and there's a lot of background stuff. But if you get the basic gist of what he's trying to say, which is that, look, all knowledge is contingent. And so knowledge of morality is also contingent, right? It's based on what? On our experiences. No, we're not born with moral knowledge tattooed in the brain. We're born and we copy other people. And just like he says, some people think that it's necessary that when the sun shines, the stone will be hot. Yeah, it's necessary in a loose sense, but not strictly because we don't have an experience of the future. He says the same thing about morality. He says, okay, it might be that everybody agrees lying and cheating and stealing are bad, but it's still a matter of convention. Therefore, moral principles are not a kind of knowledge, he says, at all. They're not a kind of knowledge. Or if they are a kind of knowledge, what he means is that if they are a kind of knowledge, then we can sort of just catalog them, just like we catalog any other kind of knowledge. So we just sort of, we have like rule books, but there's nothing necessary about them. Okay. Now, the background issue here of indeterminacy, this will lead into the next argument, but it's more of a problem, right? Or like a puzzle that gets placed here, which is that knowledge without desire is not sufficient for action. That's going to be the second argument. But his idea here is that, look, even, knowledge of morals is not even enough. Even if you knew what the right thing to do was, it's just not enough. So we don't even need morals to be knowledge. We need morals to come from somewhere else. Okay. So I'll leave argument one aside for now. I hope it didn't give you too much of a headache. I'm already nearing 30 minutes. So what I might do is talk about argument two and end this video and then do another video about the movie, but we'll get there. Okay. Take a break if you need to. Pause me. Okay. Argument two. This one's easier, much more sort of simple. Like I said, this is a more of a psychological one. So a decision is a choice to go one way or the other, right? So these sort of starting with a decision, the definition of a decision. When I decide between two courses of action, right, go to B or to go to C, I'm at A, right? What I'm doing here is deciding how am I going to spend my time? Am I going to spend the afternoon doing this or spend the afternoon doing that? Right? So what I'm doing is deciding how the future is going to play out to the best of my ability, right? Sometimes things don't work out, but I'm going to decide on a course of action. Now, in order to make a decision, you need to know a little bit about your options. So, of course, knowledge is necessary. I need to know a little bit about option one and option two. So that means I need to know a little bit about B and C, right? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do this afternoon? What would be better, right? What fits in with my goals and desires more? What is possible? What would hurt other people's feelings? What wouldn't hurt other people's feelings? All of these pieces of knowledge are relevant and they're necessary. I can't make a decision without that, okay? But a decision is not an intellectual choice. Insufficiency of knowledge, right? This is the issue here, is that I can decide mentally, like, okay, you know what, I should study. That does not mean I'm going to, right? Or for example, I'm not going to cancel my dentist appointment. It's the third time I do that. I know it sucks, but I need to do it. I keep delaying it. I'm just going to go to the dentist today, right? These sorts of very simple decisions. When you're picking between two things, it's you often know what the right thing to do is, but it's not enough to do it, right? So Hume is making a very, very basic psychological argument here. And he's just saying, look, you can know something. It doesn't mean you're going to do it. You know something is the right thing to do and not do it. So it's insufficient, although it's necessary, remains insufficient. Therefore, a desire to do A or B is also required. So on top of the knowledge, you need a desire. This is why this argument is called from a need to feel. Okay, you need to feel something. So the primacy of feeling, which can sometimes be sufficient on its own. The reason why I said that is that sometimes you do things on a whim, even if you don't know much about both of the options. Ever just gone on an adventure, like, or just like, you know what, I'm just going to throw myself into something. And in that sense, you're not really deciding either. There, you're just sort of throwing yourself uh, to the winds, right? But look how powerful feeling is. It lets you go. It lets you do the things that you have to choose between. So Hume is saying knowledge has nothing to do with decisions. It's or if it does have something to do with it, it's like a planning phase. But to do it, you need a feeling. You need a feeling of attraction. Okay, this is like the case of, like, say there are two people, right, that you're involved with. Like, don't do that. Like, pick one. Okay, don't cheat on people. But say it's early days and you're talking to two different people at the same time, and you feel like this one makes more sense, but I love that one, right? I'm sure people are familiar with such cases where, like, that's the good option, but like that's the I this happened to me when I was younger in college. This girl just flat out told me, she's like, I like you, but all my friends that think that you're crazy and I should just go out with that guy. I was like, whoa, thanks for the honesty. But it, and so she went with her decision, right? And ultimately she felt like her decision should have gone in that direction despite an inclination. So she was able to control it, but she still needed to have a feeling, right? She liked the other guy too. Sorry about telling you about my history. Uh, it's just because it was like the first time in my life I saw someone not just take an impulsive decision, like that was my life. Just, I need to feel. Yeah. So good. Where was I? So Hume is saying, look, feelings, they are what dictate. So if we go back here and we look at this, if he's saying that morality is not a kind of knowledge, or it's not primarily a kind of knowledge, what he's trying to say to you is that morality is about feeling. What you need to do is feel happy or sad about certain things. Does something disgust you or does it appeal to you? Now, those things, he says, are pretty innate. And in fact, Hume, lots of evolutionary biologists like Hume because Hume was like, look, animals like things and dislike things naturally. And so we're kind of like that too, but we have obviously language and culture on top of it. So he's a very naturalistic sort of thinker about this. But ultimately, for him, morality comes out of a feeling, right? A feeling of closeness or a feeling of aversion to some action or some person or something like that. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna stop the recording and I'm gonna leave this just like a lecture on Hume. I will then post a short video talking about the movie in light of this. Okay, this will just be a short movie. Or you know what? Yeah, no, I'll do that. Let's keep this short. Okay, please let me know if you have any questions about this. Use class time today to email me, and if you want, we can actually meet on Zoom and talk. Hopefully, you'll find time to watch this during class. Okay, take care, and I will see you next week.